Do you think all of us are capable of evil? Of some of the things we label as evil?
I think all of us are capable of doing basically the worst things we can imagine. And one of the reasons I think that is because you can see neighbors turning on each other, especially if you look historically at the start of wars or big political moments where you have people who would have called each other friends, turning each other into the police, killing each other, doing terrible things. So I think all it takes is to become convinced that the people you think are your friends are actually your enemies, whether that's just in your own world or in a larger political national landscape, that I don't think it takes all that much for us to be capable of doing terrible things. But that's also why it's really important when things are good and when you're not at war and when you have the capacity to think deeply about important issues, to train your mind on these thoughts of knowing that things like loneliness can manifest in these extreme ways, that things like jealousy and aggression, that they can turn into murder, that they can turn into these horrible versions, and to then also spot the red flags if you start going down that path. I think if we don't rehearse evil, if you will, we are much more likely to engage in it, especially in those moments where we don't have much time or energy to really think about what we're doing.
Yeah, I really appreciate the way you think and the way you talk about this. Listening to history, when I'm reading history books, I imagine myself like doing the thing I'm reading about. And I almost always can imagine that, like when I'm being honest with myself.
And it's important to admit that to ourselves. And research on murder fantasies finds that most men have fantasized about killing someone, about 70% in 2 studies. And most women as well. More than 50% of women have fantasized about killing somebody. So murder fantasies are incredibly common. And certainly, according to some researchers, that's a good thing. Being able to rehearse and think through doing the most terrible things it's a great dress rehearsal for also how we don't want to live our lives. And only if you are able to fully think through, what would I actually be like if I was engaging in this? What would I be thinking? Who would I be with? What would be the group that I'm charging against this other person? You know, who am I there with? As you said, like really putting yourself in the shoes of these people who've done terrible things. That is how you also realize that you do not want those consequences. And so, yeah, you maybe want to murder this person, but you don't really want to murder this person. That's that intuitive sort of animalistic brain coming in. But then, luckily, we have higher reasoning that goes, actually, if you think this through, that's a pretty terrible consequence for yourself. So the better thing to do is not to murder this person. So I think it's adaptive to be able to fantasize and think about these things. Obviously, if you start getting to a point where you're ruminating and you're going in these circles where you're constantly fantasizing about doing dark things, especially to a specific person, I'd always advise seeing somebody to talk to, like a psychologist, for example, because that then does become a risk factor for acting on those dark fantasies. But up to that point, if it's just a fleeting thought or something that sort of in one day you have these thoughts, that is totally healthy, I would say.
And also, I think it's useful to simulate or think through what it would take to say no in that situation. Meaning, once you're able to imagine yourself doing evil things, you have to imagine the difficult act of resisting. A lot of people think they would resist in Nazi Germany. Well, most people didn't. And there's a reason for that. It's not easy. Same reason. I've seen this. If something bad is happening on a public street, most people, it's the bystander effect. Most people just stand there and watch. I've seen it once in my life. Yeah, this is humans. So it's actually, you want to simulate stepping up